Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about how to write more accessible content in communications using technical writing principles. So before we jump in, just going to give you a little overview of who I am so that you know who is telling you all of this information. So I am an ASU graduate student. I'm actually finishing a Master's of Education specializing in human rights, social justice, and learning design. My background, though, is actually in technical writing, which I have done for about 10 years now, and I'm currently a technical writing manager for a smallish tech company. And my specialty within technical writing is really on creating and designing accessible content and learning experiences. And myself, I am disabled, neurodivergent, and have chronic illnesses, and that really definitely informs my approach to my work. The targets for today, we're going to go through the 5 principles of technical writing, how they connect to web accessibility, and then we're going to talk about the practical ways you can apply them to your day-to-day work, even your day-to-day life. For the sake of time, we're not going to dive super deep into this, but we'll give you a good overview to get you started. So before we dive in, just to center everyone with what we're talking about, we're going to be focusing on the understandable principle of the 4 principles of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So for those who maybe aren't as familiar with that, the understandable principle focuses on text that is readable and understandable. Content appears and operates in predictable ways, and users are helped to avoid and correct mistakes. So that is what the understandable principle really tries to focus on. And now, technical writing principles. This is how I like to kind of condense the different principles of technical writing. You may see some different variations of this, but this is the one I like to go with, and they all kind of come back to these same concepts. So let's dive a little bit into what these principles mean and how they connect to that understandable principle of WCAG. So first, clear. In technical writing, it is really essential for the content to be clear, meaning it needs to be free of misunderstanding as much as possible. Things like words that have multiple meanings, for instance, can be interpreted in different ways by different people. So it's really important in technical writing to make sure you're writing for your audience in a way that there will be as little misunderstanding or misinterpretation as possible. And some of the ways you can do this is through using present tense, active voice, and plain language. These are some really important fundamental concepts in technical writing that can help make your content much more accessible and easily understandable to more people. Next, this is an example of how you can apply that. So for instance, here in the before, we have assignments should be submitted on Canvas, and late submissions will be subject to penalty. And you see in the after, I've kind of cut some of that out, made it a little shorter, used present tense, submit your assignments on Canvas, and then we deduct points for late work. I've also made that one an active voice. Should and will, those types of words and phrasings can imply uncertainty for some people more so than others, depending on, their life experiences and contexts. So the second version down here would be more easily understandable and accessible. Concise. This is about using essential information only and avoiding long sentences. So those are 2 common ways. So in technical writing, this essential info only comes into play, particularly in situations where there's multiple ways to do something, or there are features or tools that have a whole wide range of uses that are optional. Now, I'm sure some of you have been in a situation where you're just like, information overload, don't know what to do. That can happen anywhere in any circumstance. So this is where this essential info only comes into play, making sure you're communicating the important info and not giving too much. If there's additional optional sort of nice to have information, putting it somewhere slightly separate, maybe putting it on a different page, depending on where you're writing the content. But making sure that essential info isn't getting overwhelmed by all this other information that is not necessary. And when I say information, I don't just mean educational information, informational content. I'm also referring to the terminology that you're using. Terms like many or soon convey information, but are they needed to be conveying what you're trying to convey? Are they contributing to your message, or are they just filler words? And then with long sentences as well. So I would say a long sentence is anything that you can't read in just one breath. If it takes you more than one breath to read it aloud, it's probably too long and someone needs a break in between to process and then move on to the next sentence. So if we take a look at this example, in the top we have late submissions will be subject to penalty and extensions must be requested in writing and approved by the instructor prior to the due date. Failure to adhere to these guidelines may result in a reduction of the final grade. Very long, definitely too long. Sentence second one is not quite as bad, but the first one was definitely multiple breaths for me to get through. I don't even remember what I read. I'm gonna have to go back through and look. And if we look at the after, we deduct points for late work. If you need more time, ask your instructor in writing before the due date. So if you take a look, and you can even pause this if you want, and look at the difference in wording and the difference in meaning. Does this after still convey the same thing? Is there anything missing? If not, let's go with this after, right? But if you come across and you're writing something like this first one, and you realize there's all these words here, but maybe you don't actually need them all to convey the point you're trying to get across, revisit the concise and these other technical writing principles to see how you can shorten it to get your message across with fewer words while still maintaining the same meaning. And this takes practice, so don't worry. Next, we have consistent. So this is about using consistent terminology, phrasing, and formatting. And the reason for this principle is that when you are conveying information and you need it to be easily, quickly understandable, if you're using synonyms, someone might take a moment, half a moment, consciously or unconsciously, to consider, are they using a synonym here to use these terms interchangeably, or is there a slightly different meaning here? And then that can lead to a series of other conscious or unconscious thoughts that will affect the way that they're interpreting something. So by using the same terminology and phrasing when you are meaning the same thing can really help speed up someone's understanding and processing of the information you're trying to convey to them. If we take a look at an example here, we have several sentences of the before trying to convey the same thing. So let's say, these sentences were throughout different documents, different pages in Canvas, talking about the same thing, trying to convey the same information, but each time wording it a little bit differently. Well, if you come across coursework should be submitted via the online portal, submit assignments on Canvas. Okay, are they talking about a different online portal? What's the difference between coursework and assignments? Papers should be submitted to Canvas. Okay, is it just papers or like all my assignments papers? I'm not sure. So by saying submit assignments on Canvas every single time, easy. Same way you've worded it, so I know it's the same information. So correct is the next principle. And this focuses on, fact checking and proofreading, making sure that the information is correct. But not only that, if you have any other media, screenshots, videos, making sure those are correct as well. One area this comes up a lot in technical writing is in the maintenance of media. For those of you who are familiar with any technical documentation out there, maybe you've used Google's documentation if you've needed help with any of the Google products or Microsoft, there's not a lot of screenshots. And the reason for that is because software changes constantly. The upkeep for keeping up with screenshots and other visual media is wild. It's a lot of effort. And so you don't actually find that many screenshots unless it's something that is essential because of the effort, the manual effort it takes to update those. So if you have any screenshots or videos in your learning materials, for instance, making sure before every semester that those are updated, or maybe assessing if you even need those screenshots. Is your text instructions accessible and sufficient enough? Or could you do a live walkthrough? Or is there another resource someone already produces and regularly updates information that you're trying to convey that you could direct folks to instead of posting it yourself in the course, just linking out to it? So here we have an example of before and after, referring to where a student should be submitting an assignment. In the original, we've called out the submit button. Perhaps Canvas used to call this submit, or maybe in certain circumstances, it displays as submit. But when the student actually goes there, they don't see a submit button. They see a start assignment button. Perhaps a student with a screen reader who isn't able to actually see the screen is going through and they don't hear the screen reader announce submit anywhere. So they're like, where's the submit button? What do I do? So this is a really good example of something you could just double check that you've called it out correctly, or if you even need to call it out. Do you think that the new name is more intuitive for folks, so you don't have to call it out anymore? Just some things to think about. And now last we have complete. So this really can be summarized as making sure that all the information and context that your audience needs, you've provided it. And you'll notice this kind of really ends up tying back to all the other principles as well, because when it comes to the information you're providing, in order to know if you've provided enough information, you have to know who your audience, your students, your peers are, and what type of information they're going to need. Now, of course, none of us can ever get this 100% right. That's the whole point of feedback, right? But doing the best you can to make sure that the information and context for your audience is available to them. And not just that you've provided the information that they need, but provided it in a way that they can understand and comprehend it. It's clear enough, concise enough for them. If you've provided information via any visual media, that there's alt text for that. If there's any videos, the video transcripts are there. And if there's any other supplemental content that can help provide more context for the students who need that. Now, if we go to the example, so here we have before, submit your final project on Canvas, late submissions will lose points. After, we've edited this to add the specific date and time that it's due. We've mentioned the file format that we need it in, and we've reiterated the late policy. Now, providing all of this here kind of completes the picture for the student who would be reading this. They have all the context they need now to know exactly what they need to do and what happens if they don't. Now, that is all. I know that was very short. We could probably talk about this for 2 hours, or at least I could. But thank you so much for watching, and feel free to connect online, and I hope to see some of you again.